Okay. Come on, baby.
Yeah.
Okay, people, it is time to get excited. Today we're going to talk about JavaScript and we're going to talk about this beautiful method called IndexOf, which basically lets you find a string inside another string. But before going into details, I want to talk about the prerequisites for this video. Same as my previous video, I want you to be able to understand these two lines of code. Particularly, I want you to be able to tell me what's going on with this var, what's going on with these quotes right here, and what's happening inside this console.log. If you can successfully tell me these three things, you have all the knowledge you need to be able to understand this video. So let's begin by talking about what's an index. I talked about this in my previous video, but I want to talk a little bit more about it in case you either didn't see the video or in case you may need a refresher for this lecture. So when we have a string, we can basically count every single character inside the string, and that count we give it the name of index. So I start counting from 0 over here, and I'm gonna count until like 5 or 6. Let me just check that I'm counting correctly. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah. So basically any one of these numbers are going to be what we know as index. So the index for this little m right here is going to be 5. The index for e is going to be 6. And the important thing to remember about this is that we start counting from 0, because that's the way computers count. So we as developers also have to learn to basically count from 0 as well. The function looks like this. We first have to provide the function with the exact value that we're looking for. It's this search value we see right here. And the second one is going to be the value that they called from index, which basically means where do you want to start. Now, this function is going to return two things. It could either return -1, which basically in this case means not found, or it could return an index that's going to be bigger than 0 if we found a value. Yeah? So these are the only two choices that this function will return, and it only needs two arguments. It needs the search value, that's the thing that you're looking for, and it needs the from index, which is the point at which you're going to start to search for this search value. With that said, we can go and write some code. So I'm going to use the same string that I have been using in the last, well, at least in the last video, because we already have a nice slide where I have all the indices for that string. So that's going to be const original string, and the string is Kali is the heartbeat of the universe. Give me a second to see that I don't have any typos. Kali is the heartbeat of the universe. Okay, Kali, by the way, it's my dog, and she is indeed the heartbeat of the universe. So let's start by doing console.log. And I'm going to do original string.indexOf. And it's in the name of this function. I'm going to use oops, my semicolon is messed up over here. Here we go. So I'm going to use the search value of off. So it's saying that off starts at index 22. Let's check if that's correct. I'm going to go to my presentation. I'm going to move to my next slide, and there we go. As we can see over here, 22 indeed is the index of the O that begins the off. So it's giving me the index for that particular value. And now let's use a different one. Instead of using off, I want to use something like not found. Notice how that's going to give me -1. By the way, I'm using an extension called Quokka that you can see right here. Not that one, over here. It's Quokka. It's the one that I'm using to be able to see in real time what's going on with my console.logs. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about this in each video, but I don't want you to be confused by what's happening on the screen. So basically Quokka is running every console log so you can see the output in real time. Now, we can see over here how this function is giving us the value of 22 when it finds off and is giving you -1 when it couldn't find something that's not in the string. Let's try to copy paste this line over here and let's do something really sneaky. Let's do off in capital OF. Notice how the IndexOf function couldn't find off even though technically off is in the string. That's because the IndexOf function is case sensitive, meaning you have to type things in the exact specific casing that you want the function to be, or that you want the string to be found. For example, if I type OF like this, it won't be found, but if I type OF like this, it will be found. And the value is 22. So I'm going to have this over here so you can see in my code, and I'm gonna make a comment. I'm going to say if the IndexOf function is case sensitive. Again, that means the case does matter, and you have to make sure that you're using the right casing in the IndexOf function. Let's do a couple more examples. So now we have this, let me copy paste the offline again. And I want to start using the second argument. Then if we go back to the PowerPoint, we can see that's the from index, right? So by default from index is gonna be a 0 value. So if I come here and I send a second argument, and I say 0, it's going to give me the same value because it's basically looking at the string. Kali is the heartbeat of the universe, and it's starting right here from the very beginning of the string. But what would happen if I start something like, I don't know, here? That would be index. Let's take a look at the presentation. So that will be index 8, right? I'm going to go right here, and I'm going to use 8. So it gave me this value because it's trying to start right here and it can still find the off. But what would happen if I give an index that is beyond the off? Something like, I know that off is at 22. What happens if I give 25? Take a look at this. It gave us -1. That means, let me clear my whiteboard. Okay. That means that my function, it's trying to look for off, but it's starting around, this is 22, 23, 24, 25. It's starting around this area, right? So it cannot find the value because it can only see this section right here. What would happen if now instead of off, oops, I need to remove my whiteboard. What would happen if instead of off, I want to actually find universe? See, it found universe at 29 because 29 is part of the indices that my IndexOf can see. Now that I've asked it to start at 25. So just so that you have it in the code that I'm writing, I'm going to go back to off so we can see what happens when it's not found. I'm gonna make a comment over here. What's the name of I think the name that they give it is from index. Yeah, there you go. From index is going to mark the place where IndexOf will start searching. IndexOf will not be able to find off here since it's starting at index 25. Okay, that's a very important thing to understand in the from index. And the other thing that I want you to remember once this video is over is that the default value for from index is going to be 0. So notice how this line over here is the exact same thing as this line over here. Line 5 and line 12 are the same. I'm gonna make another comment. It's gonna be from index. We'll have 0 by default. Okay. And you know what? That's basically it. That's basically all you need to be able to understand, to be able to use the IndexOf function. Now, as it's usual in these videos that I'm going to make, I want you to know what's going to happen when you send incorrect values into the function, because that's basically the place where JavaScript begins to break as opposed to other languages. So we always have to make sure that we send the right values into our functions, or at least we have to be aware of what's going to happen when somehow we send incorrect values. The first value I want you to be aware of is going to be empty strings. Let me copy paste this line up over here, and I'm going to, instead of trying to look for off, I'm gonna send an empty string. Notice how what IndexOf is doing is it's saying, hey, I'm trying to look for an empty string. Where could I find it? Right at the beginning of the string. Now let's say that I say, hey, let me start in index 10. So boom, it's found the empty string right at the very beginning of the point you asked IndexOf to look for. So that's gonna be a very interesting behavior you may want to be aware of. Let me make a comment over here. Empty strings will be found right at the start of the search area. And I'm gonna give you the other example so you can also have it. Here we go. So here it finds at the first index, which is 0, and here it finds it again at the same index, which is 5, at the same first index I meant. Okay, let's talk about null arguments. So I'm going to copy paste this a couple of times, maybe one more. And let's begin by not sending anything. Let's just not send anything. Notice how if we don't pass any argument to the IndexOf function, it's gonna give you -1. That basically means, hey, I couldn't find that you sent to my function. The second one that I'm going to send is going to be a null value. Again, -1 because it couldn't find null. And the last one is going to be an undefined itself. And again, it gives us, oops, I think it's complaining because I have a missed parenthesis. Okay, it's giving you -1. Basically, null, undefined, and these empty parentheses right here are ways that you can say in JavaScript that you don't have a value. And in those cases, IndexOf is going to say, hey, there's no value that I'm looking for, so I'm just going to give you -1. But a very interesting thing happens if we happen to have the word undefined in the string that you're looking at. For example, let me make another string. I'm gonna call it const edge case, and I'm gonna say this string just happens to have the undefined string, and I'm gonna have a random number, let's say 28. By the way, my birthday is May 28. Unless you want to send me a gift, I don't mind. I mean, I won't say no. So let's try to use this string now. And I'm just going to start little by little. I don't want to go too fast. So instead of using my string, I'm going to use my edge case. And take a look at this. It happened to find, well, let's just look at this number in here, right? It's just confusing, right? Because we're just sending nothing to the function and it is giving us this number right here. What's actually happening, I think, can be easily seen, or not easily, but it can be seen if we just send undefined. Now, notice how it says that it's fine undefined at index 37. And I'm gonna give you one more example over here to make things more clear. I'm gonna search for the string undefined itself. So There we go. It's saying, hey, I actually could find undefined in index 37 and it is right here. What's happening is something that JavaScript does behind the scenes called coercion. And I'm going to make a video about it one of these days, but for now, JavaScript will try to help you and it will convert from some values to other values when JavaScript thinks it makes sense. In this case, since the IndexOf function is looking for a string, if you send this value, if you send this value and if you send this value, what's going to happen is the IndexOf function is going to go back and is going to transform that into a string that basically looks like this. It just looks like undefined. And then it's going to try to find that in the string you're looking for. So in this case, it's finding it right over here. That's what's going on. And this line 29, it's actually also being transformed as undefined behind the scenes. You cannot look at it really easily, but that's what's going on. And that's something to be aware of when you're basically using this function. What I do is I just make sure that before I use my IndexOf function, I make sure that my values are neither null or undefined. Let me, for example, change this undefined to null, right? It couldn't find it, but how about if I add null right here? Boom, now it was able to find the string null because behind the scenes it is again transforming that into a string. Yeah, that's something very important to be aware of that honestly can confuse a lot of developers whether or not they're beginners, because it's honestly a very weird behavior. So I'm going to make a comment in here and I'm going to say behind the scenes JavaScript is going to coerce some values to a string. And just to close this, well, not to close, but to finish this part, I'm going to try to find 28. Take a look at this. It found the value 28 at 54. And I'm gonna bet you that if I change this 28 into a string, it's going to give me the same result. Boom, take a look at that. 28 as a number and 28 as a string will give me the same value, which just happens to be this 28 right here. That's something that I want you to be aware of. Even if you don't use it all the time, I want you to be vaguely aware about how all of these functions behave behind the scenes. Now let's take a look at the from index values. What would happen if I send incorrect values in there? I'm going to go over here and I'm going to try to send incorrect values. I'm going to give me some space. And I'm going to say, you know what happens if I just send null? Take a look at that. If you send null, if you send undefined, you still get the same result. And I'm going to, just to make that very clear, I'm going to copy that line from the beginning, this off I have in here. Okay. Notice how, whether or not you send nothing, or you send a null, or you send undefined, or you send a 0 over here, you still get the same value. That's because if you send an incorrect value, behind the scenes that will be coerced as a 0 and it will just be used like normal. And again, remember 0 is the value that you have by default. And I'm going to also over here send something that's invalid, like, I don't know, banana. I always use banana, pizza, or something like that as an example, or my cat and dog, Callie and Cal. So you're gonna have to get used to that the more that you watch these videos. But that's okay because these are really good pets, and pizza and bananas are amazing foods to eat. So Let's take a look at that same value. And just to close this, I'm gonna send an empty object. It doesn't matter if you haven't used objects before. Take a look at that. Every single incorrect value that I could ever have in the second argument is going to be coerced behind the scenes as 0, which is the default value. Except one case. What happens if I use a value that's too big? I'm gonna use 5, everything's working just fine. I'm gonna use 10, everything's working just fine. I'm gonna use something like 500 because that's too big. So look at what happens. It's giving us -1. That means that if you send a value that's too big to the from index value and it cannot find anything, it's gonna give you by default -1. So IndexOf will basically accept most incorrect values except values that are too big because those ones cannot be coerced to 0. Let me make some comments about it. First, I'm going to say invalid values in the from index argument will be coerced to 0. But out of bounds values will result in -1. I'm gonna make a comment about out of bound values in the from index. I'm trying to be as explicit as I can in these comments so that when you go back and study my code, you know exactly what's going on once you run my code. So the last example that I want to give you in this video is going to go back to some of the ones we were looking at before, especially right here. Remember, what's going on in these two lines of code is IndexOf is giving you the beginning of the search area if you pass an empty string. But a very interesting behavior happens if you pass a value that's too big in the second argument. So I'm going to send 500. Take a look at this. It gives us 37. And it's funny because if you go to Chrome, or if I go to Chrome, and I take a look at my PowerPoint, we can see that 37 doesn't really exist in this string. The last index is 36. What's going on with that? Well, I had to look at the documentation to be able to understand that. I didn't just guess it. And I think that's what you should do if you have any problems with your functions as well. Always try to use the documentation. What's going on is, in this particular edge case, IndexOf will give you the length of the string. That basically means that there are 37 characters in this string, right? So out of bounds, I like to have spaces at the beginning of my comments. Out of bounds values in the from index will result in the length of the string. But that is only the case if the first argument, oops, I didn't type it correctly, is an empty string. And that's it. I think those are all of the edge cases that you should be aware of to successfully be able to use the IndexOf function. Let's close this video by going back to Kali. I'm really happy that you watched this video. I'm really happy that you're spending your time trying to learn JavaScript. I'm going to leave right here the previous video that I made on the substring function and the playlist that I have with all of these functions in JavaScript that will help you work with strings. Please like this video if you liked it. Please subscribe to this channel if you liked it as well. I'm going to be putting a lot of content on JavaScript and in strings, and feel free to ask me for anything that you may be interested in this beautiful world of web development. Thanks again. Have fun. Have a good day. Wash your hands. I'm pretty sure you know why. Please wash your hands. Take care.